Parents of Reddit, what is something your kids started doing seeing that made you believe they were communicating seeing ghosts? Not a parent but stories my mother has told us about my sisters and I as kids. My parents bought a 150-year-old house when I was 3 months old and my mom had a few odd incidences when I was a baby. Egg. Cat freaking out at nothing or all the kitchen cupboards all randomly being open when she walked in the room, even with no one else was home. I was a very imaginative toddler with a bunch of imaginary friends, one being Harvey or the old man who lived on the stairs, as I described him to my mother. Although an odd choice of friend for a 2-year-old little girl, she wasn't overly concerned and all my friends eventually disappeared by the time I was 3.5, well before my younger sister's first birthday. A year or so later, as soon as my sister started really talking, she also began sitting on the bottom step, having full conversations with the old man who lived on the stairs. There was absolutely no overlap in our experiences and my mother was understandably freaked out. But once again, by the time she was 3-4 my sister stopped talking to Harvey, right around the time our youngest sister was born. As she neared her second birthday, when I was about 9, we started renovations on a previously untouched 4th bedroom to give me my own room. We tore down about 10 layers of wallpaper, down to the bare plaster walls, and found exquisite pencil drawings covering the walls. Huge castles sitting on rocks with waves crashing at their feet, lighthouses and landscapes. All were signed Harvey in a flourishing script. Our baby sister never spoke to Harvey and all odd occurrences stopped. Apparently, he only wanted his art seen. This makes me very happy for some reason. He cared for you and your sis and you got to see his art. We took my 3-year-old daughter to meet my wife's grandmother who lived on the other side of the county. We walk in the house and my daughter doesn't even look at her great-grandmother, but instead goes straight over to a picture of her great-great-grandmother, points at it and says, "That's the lady who lives in my room. She's nice." This gave me chills. Before our oldest was talking, we found that often when we lay him down in his room, either to sleep or change his nappy, he'd look over our shoulder and start smiling or chuckling, like he was reacting to someone. My wife and I independently decided that it was my dad come to look in on his first grandchild. All the other grandparents are still alive. Dad took his own life when I was 12. This went on for a couple of months or so but we never addressed it out loud at the time. Then we'd put our boy down to sleep and for a little while we'd hear him chuckling and gurgling for a while before he slept. Kids do that but it really sounded like he was reacting to someone playing with him. One night he was still going an hour after we put him down and my wife said, "He's your dad, go talk to him." So, feeling slightly silly at first, I went in and said to the room, "Dad, please let him sleep." I told my son say goodnight to Grandpa and get some sleep. As I walked out, I said, "I miss you, Dad. I love you." I've never been too sure about whether I really believe in spirits but I certainly felt suddenly warm and comforted. That was the last night we heard the bedtime playing. From then on, when we put our boy down, he went to sleep without a quiver and still does several years on. About 18 months later our second child, now at roughly the same age her brother was when Dad visited, starts howling not long after she's gone to bed. I go in and comfort her but got a distinct feeling of confusion for a minute before it went and then she settled down. A couple of nights later the same thing happens. I go in to settle her again but this time I said, "Dad, she can't handle this like brother did. If you were here, she'd love you and be in your lap all the time but not like this. She can't deal with it. Please leave her alone." That was the last visit we ever had that we're aware of, even with their 3 younger siblings. Only story so far that gave me real chills. That's an awesome story, man. It's great that your dad got to spend time with his grandkids, even from the afterlife. I was convinced that there was an invisible walrus in my room ages 2-5. I wouldn't go in there unless I was forced to, and I'd be screaming about the walrus the whole time. Once I settled down, though, the walrus would disappear. I went through this walrus routine every day, went back to my childhood bedroom years later and was sure I could feel a walrus's presence. Spooked the heck out of me. Not a parent, but a friend of mine had 2 incidents. For a little while, his younger daughter of about 4 would totter around their newly bought house with one hand in the air. When he asked what she was up to, she replied, "I'm holding the lady's hand." The house was reportedly haunted by an elderly woman who loved small children. Later, his 2 daughters were playing with a Super Bowler one night when it rolled under the stove. They couldn't see it or find it, so they decided to move the stove the next day. It was about their bedtime anyway, so they took the opportunity to put them to bed. Next morning, the Super Bowler was sitting on the top of the stove. Nobody took credit for getting it out. That seems like a nice ghost. Try to talk to her. I had a dog from the time I was about 6 or 7 until I was about 19 or 20. My oldest son was born a few years after he died. Flash forward to when my son was around 2.5. He started telling me about the black dog that lives in the basement, where the dog, who was a black lab, died. He said something along the lines of, "I woke up when you were still working and the black dog was in our room." I asked if he meant our current dog, who was black and tan, but he was insistent it wasn't Goonia but the other dog, and I also didn't allow the dog in our room, ever, and he never tried to come in. Also, same kid, same time frame. My best friend committed suicide days before my son's first birthday. He had no recollection of Pat besides knowing he had an uncle named Pat. Well, I come home from work one morning and he is wide the frick awake at 6 AM. I worked overnights and he usually slept until around 9 AM, talking in his crib. I assumed he was talking to himself. I asked him who he was talking to and he said my pirate friend and said he has a patch and I kinda brushed it off. Then I realized, wait, Pat was blind in one eye. Pat always cosplays pirates. Pat loved him. Pat continued to visit my son for years after that. A word. Man, I hope my dog still visits me like that when she passes. I love her so much. When my youngest son started speaking, the wife had a friend with a newborn. My son was constantly telling us what the friend's baby was saying and wanted, and he spoke to the baby more than anyone. The theory is that he was still in the cusp of being able to communicate with babies and adults, but it tripped us out for like 2 months until the baby started talking Babel. After that, the kid didn't understand what the baby was saying and would just tell us, "He's upset." My 4-year-old daughter started not being able to sleep. She was complaining that Simon was coming to her room and yelling at her. It got to the point she wouldn't let us leave the room until we told him to go away and leave her alone. My Catholic mom-in-law was getting worried and gave me a bag of blessed medals while I was at Walmart and saw her. I rolled my eyes and threw them in a drawer when I got home instead of burying them and saying prayers like she wanted. My daughter stopped seeing Simon the same night. She had no idea about the medals, wasn't with me at Walmart, and I put them in the drawer before she got home, so it creeped me out. Simon says, "Take those medals away, you little crap, this is my room." My little cousin was blonde with huge blue eyes, just like a young Dakota Fanning, but dang, she said some creepy things. She told my aunt once that there was a man without a head in the bush while they were walking. She was 4 or 5. She also used to play with her imaginary friend Lena, who had blonde hair. Apparently, Lena died because she was sick to her tummy. All well and good, but her grandma on her dad's side died of stomach cancer. She had yellow hair. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed her name. Lena. That little blue-eyed blonde-haired angel had me convinced she had the sight. No sign of it once she hit 10. My kid has sliding mirror doors on her closet. She goes to bed early, but I check on her now and then. One night I was on my way to bed and I hear weird chanting coming from her room. I open the door to check on her and she's standing on the bed staring in the mirror. She looks at me and says, "Mirror me is the real me." I close the door and nope right out of there. The next morning I asked her about what she was doing. She said I was talking to, horrifying me. She lives in the mirror and has no bones. My husband's family is haunted, so I guess it was just a matter of time, but frick that. Kids are so creepy. My daughter had 2 moments. As an infant, whenever we laid her on the changing table, she would always squirm into whatever position would allow her to stare into one corner on the ceiling of the room. It was a plain white room and plain white ceiling, so nothing worth looking at. She would always stare and smile or laugh. As she got a little older, she would point at it and say hi. We never really worried because it always seemed to be a positive experience for her. Not a ghost, but just as eerie. When she was 3, we were getting her ready to meet my Aunt Mary for the first time. We are not a church-going family, but she proudly told us that she already knows someone named Mary. We ask about her friend Mary and she smiles and tells us she's God's mom, and tells how she hasn't talked to her in a long time. Of course she doesn't remember any of these conversations anymore, but they are burned in my memory. According to my parents, when I was about 2 I started going under the stairs in the basement to talk to the little girl. I would sit down there for hours just talking and laughing. Sometimes I would even sleep down there. Frick that. Babysat these 2 boys a lot. Never said anything about ghost or the like until they moved. Once they did, all they would talk about how my friend in the room is hungry or my friend is mad now. I asked them to show me where their friend was, and as I entered the room the house lost power. WTF. Oh heck no, I would be crapping bricks. My father bought a Native American medicine bag while he was in the western US. He brought it back and gave it to my son, who was 2 or 3 at the time. We took it home and hung it on the doorknob of my son's closet. Soon afterwards, my son started complaining of not being able to sleep because the bell on the bag would start ringing. Then the spoonbills would start coming out of the closet. He didn't seem particularly bothered by the spoonbills, but just irritated that they made the bell ring. A friend of mine has 2 kids that never met their great-grandfather, passed away before they were born. They would hear the kids laughing and playing in their room and ask what they were doing. They said playing with Bop Bop. That was the nickname he had from his grandkids. Oh wow, that's what one of my grandfathers was called, and I've literally never heard another person use that term for granddad. Not my story, it's about my aunt's daughter. When they first moved into their house, her daughter pointed to the ceiling and said, "Mommy, why is the person sitting there and not in the chair?" I got chills when my aunt was telling me this. That's it for me. Time to head over to iBleach. My niece will just stare at nothing suddenly across the living room and smile. And it's a very specific "Hi, I'm 2, I love everybody I see" smile. We joke that it's a ghost, but it's just creepy. Maybe she's just making some practice. My daughter was refusing to fall asleep, so after a while I asked her why she wouldn't, and she said because those people are watching us, or something similar, and pointed to a corner of the room where there wasn't anything even vaguely human shaped. We slept downstairs that night. I was 2, LOL. Not my kid, but my boyfriend's brother. My boyfriend's parents tell me stories about their previous house, where every night, the brother would wake up terrified, claiming there was a little old man holding a lantern in his room. At first they just thought he'd seen something on TV, but they called in their friend who was a pastor just to ask him if he could take a look, but they never gave details. He brought a woman, a medium, along with him, and sure enough, she went around the house and stopped in his room. She stated there was a man in there, about 4 foot, holding a lantern in the corner of the room. Again, she had no idea about this. There was an even worse presence in my boyfriend's nursery. He was just a baby. That brought everyone to their knees. They cleansed it and the brother never said anything about him again. TLDR. Boyfriend's brother claimed the small man was in his room. Medium, unaware of the situation, comes in and states the exact same thing. I am a parent, but this is not my story. It's my dad's story. When I was 5, my brother was 2, and my sister had yet to be born. We lived in a 3-bedroom 2-bath apartment. The place was up to date for it being 2000 to 2001, but nonetheless it was creepy. My parents would often hear sounds, my brother's or my own toys making sounds, but my parents often attributed the weird sounds to the apartment settling and making natural noises, or B, one of us had woken in the middle of the night and were just like, "Hey toys," and began playing with them. My parents always look for a logical explanation. Well, it was a normal day. My dad was playing cars with my brother in front of our front door. There was linoleum there rather than carpet. They had been playing for a while when my brother looked up at the wall across from the front door. My dad explains it as my brother was playing, laughing, making car noises 1 second, and then the next he just had a blank look and was staring at the wall. My dad of course asks him what's wrong, as any parent would. My little 2-year-old brother, still with the blank face on, looks at my dad and says, "The man on the wall wants you to leave. He wants to play with mommy now." After he said that, he went directly back to playing as if nothing had happened. My dad freaks the frick out. Has the apartment blessed. The whole shebang. My mom attributed it to her little kid's imagination until much later when she was home alone with my brother and crazy crap happened. I have my own stories too. I may have been 5, but being in that apartment and dealing with paranormal crap pretty much made me the it's a ghost person rather than a logical person like my parents. When I worked as a camp counselor, rumor had it that the campground was very haunted. The cabin me and my campers were staying in was supposed to be one of the most haunted. Every day the light on the porch would turn itself off and I thought nothing of it, till I found out it doesn't automatically do that. We told the kids ghost stories to occupy them, but one day around 2 PM I hear my girls shushing each other, and then knocking. They were knocking 3 times on the floors and walls and pressing their ears to it, because apparently if we knock, it knocks back in the same pattern. I leave them to their bulls, go outside, and find the other girls totally freaking with them by knocking back. I kept my cake hole shut because it was funny. That night, around 2 AM when all my co-workers had gone to bed and none of the campers were up, I heard 3 knocks on the cabin siding. Guess they were right after all. Look at the bright side, at least it's not your home. I went into my 3-year-old son's room to find his vent covered with a blanket. I went to take it off and he started screaming and yelling that the glowy would escape. The next morning I found him sleeping on my bedroom floor because I let the glowy out. You fool, you've unleashed the glowy. I don't have any kids but my sister did this when we were little. My cousin was babysitting us when we're only 2 and 3 and one night, a couple weeks after my great grandpa died, my sister was in the living room running all across the room just laughing and staring at the ceiling. When my cousin asked what she was doing she said she was playing with great grandpa. Around the same time my other cousin, who was 2 at the time of his death, ran up to my uncle, his dad, and hugged him. My uncle asked why he hugged him randomly and my cousin said that grandpa told me to and that he loves you. Obligatory, not a parent, but mine told me this a while ago. I was around 3 years old so I have no memory of this. I used to have those weird dolls with a plastic head and floppy bodies made of fabric. I forgot the word in English. I had a twin set, one with pink body and other with blue, and for some reason I was drawn to the pink one, which I drew on and carried around the house. Some night my parents were walking near my room and heard me laughing inside. They got confused because I was alone and it was late. So they come into my room and I'm laughing with the doll on my hands. They asked me what was I doing and apparently I told them I was talking to the camel. Then they asked me why was I doing that so late and I answered it was because he didn't shut up and he was funny anyway. Creeped out but tired they turned my lights off and told me to go to sleep then went to their room. Apparently I only talked to the camel at night and if someone asked me if I was afraid of the dark I would respond no. The camel protects me. I think I grew up and forgot about that but my parents still think something was up and packed the camel when we moved around 6 years ago and it is still somewhere in the attic. We never had any supernatural experiences outside the camel and I wonder if it has something to do with it. You need to look for the doll for answers dude. My father died when my daughter was 1. He had a liver failure, collapsed and fell in the bathtub. I found him 3 days later. We never told our daughter this, just that he passed away. She is 3 years old now. Today during dinner she said, "Granddad loves yellow and white flowers. He does not like red ones. He told me so." Granddad fell in the water and died. It freaked me the heck out. My 3-year-old daughter asked, "How did your sister die?" My parents' first child died at 2 weeks due to complications. She was born the day before my mom's birthday and neither parent ever talked about her because it was just too painful. There is no way my daughter could have ever overheard that not only I had a sister, but that she died as well. A month later daughter tells me mommy is going to give me a baby brother in the spring. Wife and I found out we were pregnant 2 weeks later. We had a son in March. I've shared this before but when I was a toddler my parents came into my rooms and saw I was giggling in my crib. They asked why I was giggling, to which I replied I'm playing hide and seek with Grandpa Martin who had died before my birth. They then asked are you having fun and I said not so much. Not the parent but the child. When I was a small child I was playing in the living room while my mom was watching Dr. Phil and it was an episode about children seeing their dead grandparents. and me being the little crap I was realized that it would let me get out of trouble. So from that point on for a few weeks or so, whenever I would break something or do something I wasn't supposed to and my mom asked why did you do that, I would respond Pawpaw told it to me, and she would take me to the wall of family pictures and I would point to her dad who died before I was born. I was not a great child. Last night me and my partner both heard a sound like hoo-hoo, as in someone talking to a baby. Our 17-mo daughter started giggling like I've never heard and babbling away like she always does when she's talking. This isn't the first instance of something odd happening in our house, but it sent goosebumps all over me. Could be an angel protecting your daughter. I'd go check with a medium. If it's friendly, keep him around the house because she could be protecting your daughter. My niece started waving and talking to the wall behind me while I was caring for her. She'd even stop in the middle of screaming to smile at whatever she was seeing, or hopefully, imagining. My mom says I used to have conversations with my grandfather that I never met, and he'd tell me life stories and stuff about fishing, all of which were true, and it wigged my mom out. I also once asked if she remembered when she was the daughter and I was the mommy on the way to school one day. Apparently we lived in Paris in a past life. My kid's been fairly boring ghost wise, but a co-worker had a really interesting story. He has 3 kids. When the oldest was a baby, he used to sometimes point at nothing and cry. As he got older he'd say doggy, doggy. There was no doggy, and the parents were like overactive imagination. By the age of 3 or so, it had stopped, and the kid and parents seemed to forget all about it. Second kid was born, and nothing out of the ordinary. Third kid was born, and as a baby toddler would point at nothing and cry doggy doggy. That freaked them out. He said they went and asked a priest to perform an exorcism, and after that the baby stopped talking about dogs. Wait a minute, they performed an exorcism on the baby because he said doggy doggy. WTF. My youngest son named his favorite toy stuffed dinosaur plushie after my dead sister. I've never spoken her name out loud before to him or around him. I've never brought him to her grave. He'd never know this name otherwise. It's a European name my parents gave my sister because it sounded pretty. One day he took a small plastic gun from one of his army guys and put it in the hand of another toy and chased the dinosaur around manically saying boom boom boom, you're so dead and your baby is too. My sister was 6 mo pregnant when her boyfriend killed her. Her unborn died as well. He laughs at this toy a lot, like too much for it just being a game. He talks to it all the time as if it's responding to him in real time. Not a parent, but my mum and I both see a figure in white when something impactful is going to happen in our life, either positive or negative. When my parents separated, a person in a black cloak stood at the end of her bed, with his hands facing upwards, similar to holy images of Mary for example. But just before they got back together, a figure in white visited her and said changes on the way. My visits haven't been as communicative, but I've seen the large white figure walk by me and something has always happened in the coming days. I have dreams of my guardian angel and like to believe it's him. My 13-month-old goes into the kitchen 3-4 times a day and just stares up at the far corner of the ceiling. At first I thought nothing of it, and then she starts laughing at nothing and doesn't acknowledge me when I call her over or speak to her. I put it down to her being young and random, but really it's quite odd that it's always that corner and multiple times a day. Creeps, but not creeps enough to move, haha. My toddler stares at the ceiling and giggles everywhere. She just finds ceilings interesting, particularly at stores, and tipping her head back makes her dizzy. Last night I was reading my son a book before bed. 15 months old. I read one part and tickled him and he said hi and waved towards his crib. At that moment the mobile started playing music. Get out now. My little sister once had an imaginary friend. Who didn't? Reportedly this friend is described as not having a face. My mom asked her where the friend lived and my sister says, "Oh mommy, she's not alive." My daughter used to see spirit when she was very young and she'd be absolutely terrified rigid. It would happen most often when I was in the bath with her, and we came to realize that it was one of my Polish Mrs. female antecedents, who, when she was alive, would have done all of the caring of the female child, and it would have been strange then for the man to be in the bath with his daughter, drying her or changing her underwear, etc. There was a particular time where she came through so strongly that as I'm trying to dry and dress my rigid daughter who kept looking over my shoulder and shouting go away, I could actually feel a physical weight against me, pushing against my back and shoulder, and I had to keep communicating with her to get back. It was worst when my daughter was 2 or 3, but isn't any kind of issue now. Hopefully the aged Polish female spirit has noticed that nothing sinister has befallen my daughter during the hundreds of times that I've bathed, dried and dressed her and, mellowed a bit. At our former house, I used to see arcs of light frequently. I've read somewhere that some believe these are spirits. I've also read that it can be the result of dust in the air, so who knows? Anyway, when my son was a toddler, I saw an arc of light go from the room we were in into the bathroom. It turns out that my son saw it too because in a creeped out voice, he said, "Who's that?" and he knew the difference between who and what. He seemed really creeped out. I just kept it cool and said something like it's nothing, or something to that effect. Since moving from that house, I haven't seen arcs of light anymore. I was the kid in this situation. I'm a triplet. When we were babies, apparently every once in a while we would drop everything we were doing, look up and laugh, or move our heads around as if we were watching something. Then we would all stop and act like nothing happened. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.